to open session. I'd like to first announce reportable action items taken in closed session. Regarding items 4A, the personnel summary was approved and a copy is available at the back of the room. In regards to item 4E, the board voted unanimously to approve the amended settlement agreement number 2017.04 with no additional funds from the prior agreement. Lastly, in regards to item 4F, OAH case number 2018-040428, the board approved a confidential settlement with a maximum total of $29,500. I'd now like to ask someone to put forward a motion to the approval of the agenda, including time limits, with the exception of removing item 10, the superintendent's report.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Now we'll move to the consent agenda. Are there any public comments, or do any board members wish to remove anything from the consent agenda for consideration or discussion?
Yes.
I wrote it down also. I know you had one, Michael, and I apologize.
12F, please.
Thank you. Okay. Any other board members wish to have anything removed from the consent agenda?
Yes, please. 12G.
12G is for Barbara.
Bell schedule.
Oh, the bell schedule. Okay. Anything else?
Yes, 12C.
12B is in boy?
C is in cat.
Oh, C is in cat. Thank you. That's Laura. Chuck, did you have anything you needed to remove? Okay. Can I ask for approval of the consent agenda with the items 12F, 12G, and 12C removed?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. I believe this is a roll call vote. Mary?
Ms. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Futterman?
Aye.
Ms. Owens?
Aye.
Mr. Cord?
Aye.
Ms. Lundgren Hartlander?
Aye. Thank you. Okay, now we'll move to trustee considerations. And our first item, I'll read the item to you and then I'll say a few words, and I look forward to hearing from the students. It's learning celebrations. It's the president's recognition of exchange students from Pamplona. Can the students from Pamplona, I'm not sure, how many of you are here tonight? Oh, wow, my goodness.
Should we note
This
that
is great.
the clock is not right? That says 11.
Right, right. Oh, look at all of you. This is amazing. Oh, great. Okay, yeah, thank you. So, boy, I was going to ask you to stand up. I'd love to see you all. This is really exciting for us. What we enjoy the most is hearing from our students, and then it's especially wonderful to hear from students that travel so far to be here. I did want to say a couple things, and one is that the instructor, Brian Zalian, usually sends the board members videos of the students when you arrive and when you leave and when our students go to, in this case, Spain. And I don't know if the other board members understand why everyone gets so excited. And I was fortunate enough to be a host of a student from Pamplona 2 years ago. And the one reason you're so excited is that you've been speaking with that student for several months. And you hear from the students, they text each other, email, learn about what music they like. We Skyped with the families, so I Skyped with the student that visited us, parents, talked about special diet and staying warm. And so by the time you actually meet each other in person, you developed an amazing relationship, and it's a long learning experience. Actually, my son, we were still in contact with the family in Pamplona. It's been very special, and now I'm a little nervous to do this. I actually, before coming, Inigo said what I should say to you, that I shouldn't just say welcome in Spanish. There's a certain way to say it, he said, that you would understand that it means the beginning of something pretty special. So let me give it a try. Bear with me. I'll see if I can say this right. I'm supposed to yell in the microphone. I told him I wasn't going to do that, but I have to say it expressive. Pamplonisas! And then Pamplonices. Do you know what I'm saying? Okay. Okay. Bienvenido a Tam District. And apparently that's the way they say it at the beginning of the running of the bulls. Okay. Okay. So I guess I wasn't too far off. But we're so delighted you're here. You're going to have a great time. And I hope that you cherish this time here. We're so honored to have you here. And I'm so happy to see so many of you. This means many of our students are going to be visiting you in the spring. And I just can't thank you enough. And I really hope you cherish this time. We're really happy to have you and can't wait to hear how it goes. And I think we have some gifts for you. So I guess maybe I'll stand up over here. And so now we'll get back to board business. They can stay if they'd like to. There'll be cake pretty soon. They're welcome to stay. Yeah, I'll let the room quiet down a little bit first, though. So now we're moving on to 2 agenda items. The first is agenda item 11B, appointment of district superintendent, and that's followed by agenda item C, approval of employment agreement for the district superintendent. So I just want to start by making a brief statement. As you know, we've actually started this year very, very well. The school is humming, where everyone is doing very, very well. This is in part, we want to thank the interim student superintendents. This district was fortunate to have the talent of Dr. Walt Buster and Dr. Valerie Pitts step in as interim during the transition, both with years and years of experience and also great familiarity with our district. Then, almost unplanned, we were presented with the opportunity to interview well-qualified candidates for the position of permanent superintendent. This opportunity allowed us to avoid the cost and time of a formal search for a superintendent. We believe this happened because the district's reputation, which makes the position of superintendent here very attractive. As a result, we interviewed an individual whom we believe will be the next great superintendent of the Tamalpais Union High School District and who meets all the characteristics and qualifications that we sought in a superintendent. Under this next agenda item, the board will vote to appoint Dr. Tara Topier, who many of you already know, as our next superintendent. So normally the board usually has a discussion, but I'm going to ask that we wait until the next agenda item that we discuss when we make the approval for the contract, if everyone's amenable to that. So I'd actually like to ask for a vote for the item A, appointment of Tara Topier as the next permanent district superintendent.
I move that we appoint Tara Topier as the next superintendent of the Tamalpais Union High School District.
Is there a second?
Second it.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. So now I'll move on to the next item, which is closely linked, which is the approval of the employment agreement for district superintendent. And at this point, we will be accepting public comment. But I do want to make note of some items particular to this agreement. 11C, this is a summary of the salary and fringe benefits contained in the superintendent's employment agreement. That's what I'll be expressing with you now. We will have copies of the agreement available for you, that whoever would like to take a look at it. The term of the agreement is from August 28th, 2018 to June 30th, 2021. Annual salary is $225,000. The fringe benefits are the same health and welfare benefits as all management and all employees of the district, which is $18,000. She will also receive annual dues to AXA and enrollment in the AXA Superintendent Academy. I don't recall what that acronym is, but it's Academy. Oh, she wrote Association of California School Administrators. Someone just went like this. They wrote it down for me. I didn't see it. So those are the terms. And so now I would like to open up to public comment, and then the board will have a discussion of any kind that we see fit to. Does anyone have a comment? Any public comment?
I'm Corey DeMars, and I'm the president of the Tamalpais Federation of Teachers. Tara brings a great deal of skill to the district, but most importantly, TFT could not be happier to finally get heart and soul back into the seat of the superintendent. Congratulations, Tara.
Thank you, Corey. Okay, now I'd like to open it up to my fellow board members. Oh, is there another? Oh.
I'm just sitting here, I'm completely surprised. That's great news.
You need to come to the microphone, I'm sorry. And you have to identify yourself, even though we know who you are.
Wow, what a great day. So my name is Brian Zaley, and I'm a French teacher at Tam High and Global Studies Director, and Tara's been working with me for the last year and a half with all the Global Studies program. And it's just been a breath of fresh air. She's made everything easy. She said, yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to do this easier. This makes sense. It's been great. So this is great news. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm assuming there's no further public comment. I'd like to open it up to board members that would like to make a comment. And we can go in any order, whoever's ready.
Well, I'll start. Having known Tara as a teacher, administrator, colleague, while I was teaching in the district, I couldn't be happier. I think we were just extraordinarily fortunate at this particular time, in this particular junction, to have someone of such great skill, intelligence, and most important, integrity as our superintendent. To me, this is a great day. I'm leaving the board in a few months. I just feel like I've done a great job now. It's like, after sort of getting beaten up for a few years, it's like, damn it, I did something right. So, yeah, it's just a really good feeling for me.
Now, I hope I can do this without clutching my throat, but I had the privilege and the honor to, I don't think I can do it. 16 years ago, we were fortunate enough then to make a very good decision when we hired Tara. I had the opportunity, I don't think I taught her anything, but she had it all then. I was her mentor then, an honor and a pleasure, and she continued her progress in social studies, but where I saw her work, I knew her through her work before I knew her person. And her work was through the peer resource class, which she designed. I think it was one of the first in California. I don't want to date you too much. And in that class, it was many of the curricular materials that we now naturally use in our wellness programs were developed with Tara's guidance, with students at the center of that instruction. They created the curriculum, they delivered the curriculum way back when. It was at that time when our students in peer resource were addressing the issues of suicide and suicide prevention way back when, and the students were leaders at that point. She went on and supported us through many summer schools, a lot of triage. She became our principal after Corey did his term, and picked up seamlessly. It was a very well organized, very efficiently delivered intervention to our kids who showed up there. It helped them transition to the next year. I think we did a lot of good work there. She knows what that work is because she did it. I know in the past 3 years that she silently, quietly has picked up pieces that we didn't know that we had to pick up. And that prepares her for this job. This is a no-brainer. This is just moving right in, not skipping a beat. We were very fortunate that the candidates we interviewed were so competent, so qualified. And I would say that when I read, I think I'm going to say this, when I read our application, it did make me cry. To be understanding that this is an institution that cares for children and cares for the people who serve those children, and that it cares to develop the talent that's here. We have it, we're ready to go. Couldn't be more excited and more profoundly grateful. Thank you.
I'm not sure I can follow that. Well, I understand that there's some relatives of Tara here in the audience. Maybe we can introduce Tara. Maybe you could introduce the relatives who are here.
Oh, yeah,
This is my mother, Patricia, and this is my sister, Ann.
Got it.
Congratulations.
Well, I just want to thank both of you for lending us your daughter and your sister. She's been really busy, as you know, and she's about to get busier, but I want to thank you. I guess the most thing, Tara is a woman of great substance. And frankly, she's all about teaching and learning. She just keeps her focus on the students and really what is best for students. And as she would correct me if she had the microphone, all students. And that's great, because we need to keep being reminded and keep being grounded that's why we're here. She's a leader, and she's also has the ability to grow and will grow in this office with the additional responsibility, and with the support of her peers and those of you who are sitting around her. And we are counting on the great leadership team that we have to help Tara, succeed and to make this district, make a lot of progress. And I know we feel as a board very comfortable in the group of you and in Tara as the leader of that group. And I guess just the last thing I want to say is there are people who, the more you are exposed to them, your respect for them grows over time. And Tara is one of those people. And we are extremely proud and extremely fortunate to have your leadership leading the district on a going forward basis. Thank you.
I don't know how I ended up at the last one speaking here. I'm already teary-eyed. Walt and Valerie, I can't see you. You're back there. I just wanted to make sure you felt appreciated too as we hand the baton off to Tara. You have been so helpful, and I know you're going to be there. Valerie, from far away, at least temporarily, and Walt, you're still going to be around. I'm so grateful for what you have provided to us as a board and to the whole district the last, I think it was July 1 that you came on. So I don't want you two to get lost in all this celebration tonight. We have a lot to celebrate, so thank you for your contributions. And Tara, you know, I can't really add much to what my colleagues have already said, other than during your interview, and I won't recap the whole interview, but we asked Tara to give us an elevator speech, a 30-second elevator speech on the TAM district. And one thing, I was really listening hard because I was in the woods of Wisconsin at the time, and she talked about continuous improvement, that this district is all about continuous improvement. And that really struck a chord for me, because we are all continuously improving. We as a district are constantly striving to learn from mistakes and move forward, and Tara is going to be at the helm of that, and we are so fortunate that she will be our role model for how to have a growth mindset and to learn from mistakes and have a positive attitude and treat people right. And so I think I'm so excited that I get to work with you on this governance team for 3.5 months. And Chuck, I have to disagree. I think that you haven't screwed up all the time you've been on the board, but I mean, I got a little defensive when you said that too. But I understand how you feel. I feel like we're going to be leaving this board and this district in such good hands with Tara at the helm. So thank you for jumping in. It's all about timing. You are ripe for this right now, and it's going to be so fun to see what you do. Thank you.
So I have one more thing to comment. I echo everything the fellow board members have said, and the superintendent is referred to as the, CBO of the district, and it's a big job. And so often, there's many of us with certain specialized, slice of expertise, and it takes somebody that can really see the full picture and balance all the elements and have eyes wide open, be able to be detailed when you need to and intervene when you need to, and you have all those, and you've shown that to us over the years. And so that's why I think we're so confident that you will be successful and you will do great things by this district. But I also want to thank my fellow board members, and in particular the 3 that are going to be moving on come December. And because what I said just now is that it takes somebody that's very, well-rounded with lots of expertise and isn't too narrowly focused to run the district. That's what it takes in a board to make a decision like this. And we have 3 board members that have been on the board almost 5 years. We're involved very heavily with prior hiring and have had a pulse on the community to a depth that really impressed me when I became a board member 2.5 years ago. And I think our combined background and skills enabled us to work very well together and very hard together to make this decision. And like I said when we started, this wasn't what we thought would happen quite so quickly, and it just came. We had candidates come forward, and we were so thrilled to know that people saw this district, in such high regard. And then, we had pretty high standards going into the interviews and looking at the resumes. We were very clear what it would take to run this district and what this district's challenges are. We've been living and breathing it. And we couldn't have been more pleased that you came forward. And we look forward to working with you. But I really do want to thank my fellow board members, especially the 3 of you that I'll miss working with you. But boy, thank you. You crossed the finish line pretty darn strong, and you're holding your responsibilities all up to the bitter end, and thank you. So I think we're ready to entertain a motion. Would someone like to make a motion for the approval of the employment agreement for the district superintendent?
I move that we approve the employment agreement for district superintendent.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, that carried. And now what we're going to do, Tara and I are going to sign the agreement, and we have cupcakes, and we'll take like a 5-minute break or so, and then we'll reconvene. So go eat, and Tara and I will sign. Yeah. Okay, good evening. We're now reconvening open session. Okay, now we're moving on to item 11D, Fiscal Advisory Committee and Budget Update, and this will be Lars Christensen and Corbett Elson.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I've lost my seat partner over here in the front row. When in the midst of the board conversation with regard to our new superintendent, one of the things that resonated was Laura Anderson and the notion of continuous improvement. What drives continuous improvement in our school district is our local control accountability program. And, the goals associated with that program is what drives the district. And, you're familiar with them. I won't, quote them, but they really are the underpinning of the work that we do with regard to teaching and learning and running this institution. So as part of that program, we have an LCAP committee, and that committee continues to refine and update those goals because it is a living document. I hear a lot of noise in the front row. And so we have an LCAP committee. At the same time, when we talk about continuous improvement, we also are a district faced with very, very serious fiscal challenge. That's not a secret to anybody on the board, in our school district, or in the greater community. So we've got some very, very difficult decisions to make. So we also, this year, have a fiscal advisory committee. That committee is charged with making recommendations to the superintendent, who in turn will review those recommendations and then make her own recommendations to the Board of Trustees with regard to potential cuts that we may be forced to make given the circumstances of our current situation. Last night, we convened both bodies in a single meeting, the LCAP committee and the fiscal advisory committee. There were a few absences because of conflicting engagements, but for the most part, the two committees were there and came together. And, we basically laid the groundwork for the work in front of us. We talked about modes and methods of decision making and agreed how we were going to make decisions on these recommendations going forward. We stressed to the group on more than one occasion that they are advisory groups, particularly the fiscal advisory group is in fact an advisory group, not a decision-making body. We reviewed where we are with our current budget. You're going to see that in a moment from our new CFO, Corbett Elson. And went through a couple of exercises that I think will serve us well as we come together and actually begin the work. The LCAP committee will meet on a periodic basis. Their meetings are spread out much differently than the fiscal advisory group. The fiscal advisory group, we will have a number of meetings early on in the fall semester in order to bring the necessary recommendations to the superintendent in timely fashion with regard to budget construction and so forth for the coming year. And basically we're looking at two scenarios with those recommendations. One is the current need, the immediate need to make some cuts. And then once we have disposition on our parcel tax endeavor in November, we'll know how deep those cuts need to run. So we'll have to structure it in a couple different ways. The other thing that we'll talk about long-term is long-term fiscal solvency. I mean, we need to learn to live within our means. We don't want it to be a boom and bust cycle of, enrollment is up, so we're hurting, enrollment's down, so now we're flush with money again. We need to make sure that we don't have this cyclical, the up and down of fiscal challenge in good times. We need to make sure it remains constant and steady, and we learn to live within our means. So I think that's probably the best way now to introduce Corbett Elson, new CFO. I should say, by the way, that Corbett's been with Cabinet for roughly a month now, and talk about seamless transition, just like a duck to water. It's been fabulous. So
Duck to
Tara,
water. Okay.
Corbett, myself, we enjoy working together very much, and that will continue on in the days, weeks, months, and years to come. With that, Corbett Elson.
Quack.
Good evening, board, Dr. Topier. So as Lars had mentioned, he set me up quite well. I'm going to give you a presentation. There's two purposes for this. A, I want you guys to hear this information, but B, I want you to hear what this presentation will be like for other audiences. So you have an idea of some of the messaging and information that will be consistent. I'm going to apologize in advance to Michael and Laura, who heard this last night, and they're going to hear it again. Corey, Tim as well. But it's purposeful to be a consistent message. I want all audiences to know that and to get feedback and ideas. And what was shared last night, I've tweaked slightly with some feedback for today. So we're going to continue to evolve it and also make sure this is a two-way street to share information and get ideas, questions back. So it's an iterative process. So without further ado, here we go. I'm not going to share who I am. This is who I am, but I want to make sure people know whatever community I'm invested in this community. I've worked in the district since 2003, and I will have 3 beautiful girls that will come through the school in the future years. So I am professionally and personally connected and care about what happens moving forward. I'm not going to ask you as well, but I am going to use research that we're going to activate prior learning. I'm not going to ask you now, but I do want the various audiences, whether they're teachers, whether they're community members, whether they're the Redwood Foundation, to surface what do they know, what questions do they have, and what concerns. So people can converse about that and share their ideas. There also is a Google form link that I'll be emailing out to each group afterwards. So if they don't feel like they were able to share it comfortably in the moment, they can go home that night, the next day, and share that idea. So we'll be compiling that, and that's another mode to get as much feedback, as much ideas, either personally in the meeting or electronically or whatever means possible. So basic agenda, I'm just going to talk about our context, where we're at, what our enrollment growth and our basic status, our revenues, expenditures, reserves, cost reductions we've taken to date, our upcoming supplemental parcel tax, and the process for decision making and staff and community input. I'm not going to belabor that right now because Lars spoke to detail about that a little bit ago, but I want to get your input on that as well. I am going to pause periodically for clarifying questions every 4 or 5 slides. Feel free to interrupt me if you feel like it's urgent, but please know I'm going to pause to try to keep the flow of the conversation going. But again, trust your judgment. So I am starting with the end. This is a slide you'll see again, but this is a synopsis slide that captures a lot of our situation. As we know, the first bullet, in the last 10 years, we've had significant enrollment growth in our district. And I do highlight that as a source of pride. Our community members want to come to live in our community. They want their students to come, their children to come to our schools. And that is a positive thing. Comes with that, with additional students, we're hiring additional staff. So we've hired 70.5 additional certificate staff during that time. As you know, we are a basic aid school district, which means we do not get extra revenue from the state for every student that comes. Our revenue pie is more tied to property tax growth, not the enrollment growth. Important distinction, given that 95% of the state's in the different way model. So as a result of our expenditures increasing over our revenues, we have these resulting operating deficits. I'll get into that more in subsequent slides. To offset those operating deficits, we have what's called a reserve or a fund balance. In layman's terms, that's a savings account. That's what people have to buy them time to offset those operating deficits. Buys time to get input and to make decisions about how to have our fiscal integrity and sustainability. Just a little bit of context, our reserve was roughly $25 million a few years ago and is currently $16.5 million to start this year. But at the rate of our operating deficit, the reserve is projected to be depleted by 2020-21, and we need to prevent that from happening. That is critical. In very simple terms, the solution in my mathematics teacher hat, $8 million. I'm relating that to the $7.9 million up above. I'm just rounding for simplicity. Our solution involves doing one of 2 things. We can either reduce costs and or raise revenue. There's 2 ways of doing that. You guys have taken a measure, a step on the parcel tax measure coming before us in November. As we know, that has the potential of raising, if passed, will raise $5.1 million annually. So if the parcel tax passes, we have an additional of +5. That means we will still also need to reduce costs. That's an important distinction for all of us to know. And that's where the $3 million comes into play that Lars alluded to, and that's our goal. that we're committed to is identifying reducing costs this year as much as we can, as reasonably as we can, and going into next year. If the parcel tax does not pass, that's obviously a difficult situation. No parcel tax revenue means we need to identify $8 million of reductions. So those are the two scenarios that Lars alluded to earlier. Scenario one, parcel tax passing with revenue. Scenario two, without it passing. So we need to get staff and community input. We'll go into detail a little bit more. I'm not going to go into every slide in detail. This is a little bit of reiteration of before. But all that does highlight is there are cost drivers that we don't, as a public school system, have complete control over. We have a moral and a legal obligation to serve every student with special education needs, to give them the supports they deserve and are legally allowed to have. There's retirement costs, health benefits, and other mandates. So I'm just highlighting there are things that we don't entirely have control over as a school district. I also want to highlight the data sources for this presentation are a June adopted budget. You guys adopted in June. And the multi-year projection that came forward 2 weeks ago with an update. This will be our data source moving forward, so people know we're using consistent information. That will change in December once we know the parcel tax change and the results of the cost reductions we've taken so far this school year. I'm not going to dive into this ad nauseam for you guys, but again, this is a chart you've seen before that shows the long-term enrollment growth patterns of our district. The last 10 years are this peak at the very end. That's over here. We are 2 years away from our enrollment peak across the district. Unfortunately, when we come down, it does not go down at the rate it came up. We do not have an inverted bell curve. It rises and then goes down more slowly after the 2-year peak, after the peak 2 years from now. That increase over the last 10 years represents a 32% increase, which is significant. Very briefly, I know you guys are well aware of the difference between a basic aid and a state-funded or local control funded formula school district. But I just want to highlight the difference for the community to understand, for our staff to understand the difference between that. Long story short, the state-funded system means we get an entitlement. The number of students we have in our district times the dollars per student with some additional dollars for our supplementary needs, given the students maybe language needs, social and economic status, we get some additional dollars, but that's an entitlement. That's a mathematical formula. On the basic aid side, we still have that formula, but our local property taxes exceed that entitlement. So we're allowed to keep our local property taxes. That's generally a very positive thing. The only challenge is the bullet point on the bottom left. Now that we are going through insignificant enrollment growth, we do not receive those additional revenues. Therefore, our revenue pie is sliced into smaller slices for every student that comes. That's the situation we're in. Just a little background on that. So let me pause for now, a little break in the action. Just see if there's any clarifying questions at this point. Yes.
When you talk about retirement costs, I have two things. Are they interested in the story behind the retirement costs? Because that's very, as you know, very nuanced. It's very complicated.
It is.
Are people asking about that?
I can speak to the 3 presentations I've made so far. Last night at the Fiscal Advisory Group, it did come up, and there was a conversation around that. I have a slide coming up that gets into a little bit more depth. I just gave a very brief mini presentation with the Redwood High Foundation, who asked a passing question. So yes, it's come up so far, absolutely.
I hope that we can offer people some links, some follow-up, so they can get a little more depth behind it. I thought county office presented, Joe Nation presented his students' work in graduate work on this issue in California, and I think it would be helpful to have that available to people, because otherwise it's tossed off and categorized in a way that I don't think is very clear or correct in that sense. And then the title, and this is probably just because I'm an old school person, can you tell? Roadshow bothers me.
Okay.
That suggests that there's some kind of a hustle going on here, and there isn't.
Okay.
This is a presentation of information that's been vetted, that thoroughly. So roadshow, I don't know about you guys, but roadshow just kind of puts me off.
Okay.
I don't know what you guys think about that. Anything?
I think that's a good point. Like, should it be
presentation,
Budget 101 or
workshop, something,
It's easy enough to change.
yeah.
Agreed. If it puts you off, I don't want to put anyone off, so that's an easy
Yeah.
change, no doubt.
Yeah, it doesn't put me off, but if
Okay.
it puts anybody off, there's
Absolutely.
probably more people out there that it puts off.
Absolutely, that's a simple change. Julie, no.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other clarifying questions? Okay. So let's dive a little bit deeper into revenues. Our total revenues for this upcoming year is a total of $82.7 million. As you see in the pie chart, the dark blue is we're primarily funded by our local property taxes, as we alluded to. In addition to that, we have our already approved parcel tax that brings in this year $10.3 million on top of that, and that is a fixed 3% annual inflation escalator. And that equates to $293 per parcel for the roughly 40,000 parcels throughout our community. We also get $7.7 million in state and federal revenues combined, and $2.5 million in other local revenue, primarily made up by our foundation donations from TAM, Redwood, and Drake. Okay. On the other side, expenditures, that breaks down the various types of expenditures. You've seen this before in different ways. Again, we are a people-based business, so the far bulk of our expenditures are people-related. And we've been hiring more people because of the aforementioned enrollment growth. Barbara, you mentioned about the Pension Reform Act. So in 2013, the governor and the legislature approved statewide pension reform to keep our future pension system solvent. That both employees and employers had significantly increased their contribution to that to keep those systems solvent. We're just in the tipping point where those rate increases are escalating over a period of time, so we're starting to go up the escalation aspect of those rate increases. Since the pension reform, the district's accrued roughly $4 million of additional costs per year, and as we go into the last big wave of rate increases compared to today, we'll also see $2.7 million more annually by 2023 at current rates.
Let's call it the next big wave. You might be right that it's the last big wave of increases, but I'll bet you're not.
Unfortunately, I think you're right, Michael. Yeah. Move along. So again, with our expenditures exceeding revenues, that gives us an operating deficit. It's a structural operating deficit when it's a year-over-year situation like ours is, not a one-off because of a one-time situation. So I'm not going to read this to you, but again, these are projected operating deficits for this year and 2 years out. I'm going to clarify this does not demonstrate any potential parcel tax revenue for the fall, nor does it include any cost reductions taken this school year or into the future. Okay. So just another pause. Any other clarifying questions at this point?
Will you be emailing this presentation to us, or will it be available?
My plan is with every group, I'll email out both the slides and the feedback form together. So every group will get that within a couple of days, and I obviously will provide that as soon as possible.
And will it be on our website, or is this not something that we would put on the website?
We certainly can. We talked about doing that. We haven't identified a specific time yet, but we can certainly do that.
I'm just thinking that if it's meant to educate all sorts of different groups, that might be a good place for it to live. I don't know.
Or maybe a fact sheet that takes this information, since it's often. Can you go to the previous slide? This is where I sometimes ask for clarification. When you look at these numbers, there's sometimes a carryover from the previous year. So is for instance, the 1920 8.7, does that include a carryover from the previous year of the 7.9? So is it an incremental 2.2, or is it a whole brand new set of 8.7? I'm probably not saying that right.
It's for our
Yeah.
operatives for this year, 7.9.
Right.
Next year, because our expenditures will increase for that year and our revenues will increase, that gap for that year only increases to 8.7.
Right, so 7.9 plus is the delta brings us to 8.7. It's not a brand new 8.7 on top of the 7.9. Okay, that was what I wanted to make sure, because I think that's the part too that, especially people in the public, when they look at it, they look at that and think, my gosh, it's every year on top of it, it's the same. It's an additional 8.9, and part of it's for a carryover.
Well, and we'll
anyway, go ahead.
Once we get into reserve, that we'll also see how that comes into play.
Right, it's the same kind of thing. Okay,
That
thank you.
depends on whether the cuts are recurring
Right, that's what I was
or whether
asking.
they're one-time cuts.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's
well
what I
said.
was,
Yep.
yeah.
Thank you. So our reserves, our fund balances, our savings account. That is one-time money that's used to offset those annual operating deficits we just looked at. That buys us time to get input from our stakeholders and community to make decisions that we want to take. The district has built up reserves in anticipation of this enrollment growth. This is not a surprise. We know this has been coming for some time, and the reserves were built up in preparation for this, and has allowed time to make decisions. Again, our context, the reserve was $25 million a few years ago, 60.5 now, and again, projected to decrease by those operating deficits. Okay. And the one-time cost of cost reduction versus ongoing is important dynamic moving forward. Okay. So what have we done so far? So this past spring, the district did make some cost reductions. They identified $1.8 million of savings. I'm listing them here. You're familiar with these. This teacher leader model was suspended. Instructional coaching was reduced, eliminated all but essential food, travel, and conferences, and reduced the number of new teachers that were budgeted for and assistant principals and counselors by staffing tighter to the contractual ratios we have. The original goal of that group was to identify $3 million of savings. They were able to come back with the staff recommendation of $1.8 million that you guys approved. So since then, what have we done so far this fall or this summer? We need to continue to look at reducing costs as opportunities arise. And the goal is identifying at least $3 million for this year and seeing what happens with the parcel tax. Some examples of not fully backfilling my position, combining some positions. We talked about school site budgets being reduced by 25%. District departments, and clarifying district departments are meant to be like M&O, IT, nutrition that cut across schools with a 10% reduction. That's currently at $300,000 and will continue to increase. We'll talk about our unrestricted caregiver balances that sites had last year that they did not spend. That's going to come back to the district to offset those balances. We'll know in a couple of weeks what those numbers should be. And again, we're ongoing examination. Every opportunity that comes up, we need to take the time and do our due diligence. Is there an opportunity to maintain service while also getting some cost reductions or efficiencies as a result of that? Now on the additional revenue side, I don't need to talk too much with you guys about that, but we again have a parcel tax coming up. That is going to be in parallel to our current parcel tax, so we'll run parallel. They both will expire in 2022, a 4-year term. That equates the additional $149 per parcel. Will bring in annually $5.1 million in revenue. One important distinction to know, this is in the resolution, that if it's passed on November 6th, starting November 7th, the day after, for every day through the remainder of the fiscal year, we're able to accrue that revenue, that one-time money. That's roughly 7 months left in the fiscal year, which roughly equates to one-time revenue of $2.9 million. I just want to highlight, while we can, if passed, we can account for that in our December 1st interim budget report. From a cash flow perspective, I met with Roy Given at the County Assessor's Office. That will show up on the property tax bills the following tax cycle in 1920. So that's just more of a cash flow issue, but we will be able to account for that. And again, that's one-time revenue. So another pause for any clarifying questions? Yes, Barbara?
This may be just way out there, but is there any thought about, I mean, maybe it's too premature to look at then a recovery of trying to get back to building up those reserves if necessary? I know we can't see it now, but eventually we're going to be looking at possible scenarios. Can we expect that?
Absolutely. That's something we had some discussion with last night. We've talked about in cabinet in detail. The reason we have time to make thoughtful decisions this year is because the district built up previous reserves. Yeah. We need to be mindful of, not, as Lars mentioned, not only have a short-term plan for the immediate, but that plan needs to be attached to what's our long-term fiscal plan. And a critical part of that is what is our target reserve that's appropriate for a basic aid district. Should in future unforeseen economic events happen, future boards, future us have time to have thoughtful decision making to buffer us from that.
We'll have public comment at the end of his presentation. Yeah, thanks.
So again, process for decision making. Again, Lars reiterated that, but I'm going to be going out to as many people are willing to hear me. That's an open offer. I'm a resource to present for one-on-one. But as Lars mentioned, the LCAP and the Fiscal Advisor Group is the formal advisor group to help bring in additional ideas, additional thoughts, comments for their stakeholders, in addition to all the various means we have. So I'm going to continue some examples of groups I'll be speaking with, an update of, actually I'm going to skip forward, on this budget roadshow that I'll be changing the slide in the future. This is an example of just dates that have already occurred, presentations, and that are already scheduled for this fall, and more to come. Just a reminder, you guys are more than invited to come. Just obviously keep Tara in mind so we're mindful of how many of you are there at any given one time. Let me back up briefly. Budget calendar, we talked about this at the last board meeting. I'm not going to belabor it, but a couple of critical dates. If I start with November is our parcel tax ballot election. That's obviously a very important date. Immediately after that, in December, I'll be here bringing our updated first interim budget of our budget to date with the cost reductions we've talked about and the parcel tax ballot election results. Backing up to October, as Lars mentioned, that's why the Fiscal Advisor Group is going to begin preparing draft recommendations for the superintendent to consider. Those are draft recommendations under those two scenarios that we talked about. I feel like it's critical that this group meets early, does their due diligence on both options, and has some draft work to begin thinking about. And obviously we'll see how the parcel tax ballot plays out and move from there. Again, back to then, I'm not going to be a literalist, but this is just one slide that again summarizes much of the conversation we had. And again, I'm with all groups, not necessarily here, but I'm going to be leaving this up to open up to questions, comments, concerns, whether I'm with the Redwood staff on Thursday, community groups for them to either share it verbally or the provided Google form as well. So before I touch on a couple of other budget-related items, let me pause here for any questions or comments about this presentation so far.
So I have a couple of questions to. First question is, first is a comment. Thank you for putting Barry Bonds on that slide. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Second is, you know, there was some question. There was some commentary last night in the discussion about management. You know, the numbers of management positions, and I just wonder whether, and we know that in the last 10 years, right, we have the statistics, right? We've hired more than 70 additional full-time equivalents for teachers and counselors, but the number of management slots is actually down over that period of time. And I don't know whether you just want to keep that one in your pocket for when somebody asks, or whether you think it's a point worth making. But I think in terms of demonstrating sort of prudent management, I think it's a good data point.
Sure.
So I just suggest it to you. If you want to include it, you can include it. If you don't want to, that's fine. But my guess is it's going to come up again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can answer that right now. Tara and I actually spent about 45 minutes this afternoon, or earlier, late morning, working on that, kind of going through the history of as positions have folded, combined. But in 2009-10, correct me if I'm wrong, we had 28 FTE equivalents of administrators in the district. Now, given literally those changes we just described, we have 1.3 FTE less, so 26.7.
Right. Okay. So the second thing is you know, the special ed costs are just striking in you know, and in just the way they've ballooned as a result of increased numbers of students, changes in the law, and so forth. And you mention it, and I don't know whether you know. I guess you've given some thought to how much you want to dive into that or dwell on that or not, and maybe it's just too diversionary in light of sort of the big picture message. But those numbers are, I mean, those numbers are striking in terms of the way those costs have outpaced, have grown over that time. So I just point that out so that if you may consider that to be a data point that might be useful in these presentations or not. And I'll leave it to you to make that decision.
Thank you for the input. In a moment, I'll show you the next slide that may answer some of that, but absolutely. That's something we need to be mindful of and make sure we're clear on the moral and legal responsibility we have to provide that, while also acknowledging that it is roughly for the last 10 years, we've had in the range of 15 to 22% annual growth in those costs. So that's something we need to look at and be thoughtful about. How do we maintain the legal and wonderful services all of our students deserve and need, while also being fiscally prudent. So in a moment, I'll show you in the next slide an idea that speaks to that a little bit. Any other questions or comments for now? Okay. So segue, just a couple other budget-related items. Dr. Topi and I spoke last board meeting, giving an update on the Tamascal CEC, the services provide for those students in the realm of special ed, how it's a win-win-win for the student, for the family to live in their community, coming back from a non-public school, for example. We get to serve our students, which is a win. And obviously, there are significant cost savings. After 1 year, one-time cost the first year, an estimated $560,000 annually for each CEC. So we've talked with Tara, Wes, and Amira on identifying, is this something that we could scale up? And we certainly think we can. So we've decided, and we're acting upon, to open a Drake CEC classroom in January of this year. Amira feels like we certainly have the need for it. That is the community that is in the most need. And fortunately, while Liz, Seabury, and Chad wouldn't say there's classrooms laying around, they certainly can make that happen with rearranging some classes potentially in their schedule to identify a classroom that's appropriately placed there. So again, this would be for half a year. There'd be some ramp-up one-time costs. We will not reap the full $566,000 savings this spring, but we certainly will after those first-year costs fully enrolled. And obviously some other odds in it. So that is positive news.
Did I hear you say that there's already existing classrooms, so we wouldn't need portables?
That is correct. This would certainly not involve any.
So the startup costs will be a lot less than what we experienced at Tamascal.
Exactly. That was by far the massive
that
cost.
Was the that's really good.
We would need to do a little bit of work in that identified classroom. It needs to have a private office for private one-on-one therapeutic services. And obviously just needs to have some basic furniture that's appropriate for that. But those one-time costs will pale in comparison to the Tamascal CEC. Okay. Additionally, on the next board meeting, I'll be coming back to you with our unaudited actuals from last school year, 2017 and 18. This is where we will be actually closing the books, seeing how we compared to what our budget projection was, and then where we actually line up, and what's the variance within that. So I'll be bringing that back. That number will impact our starting fund balance, our starting reserve levels appropriately. That will not impact our operating deficits. It will simply affect a movement of our starting fund balance. Initially, we've been talking about, just with my freshest in the business office, how can we work efficiently as a business office, not only within the office, but interaction with the staff and the site. So we've been discussing some ideas. Hope to bring, once cabinet vets that, bring back for some ideas to discuss with you of how we can work most efficiently, given the resource situation we have, to provide the best service we can to the sites. So it's a little foreshadowing.
May I just make a comment that
Please.
I've spoken with some classified folks who work with you, and they are elated with the relationship and their effectiveness now that they can proceed and do their jobs well.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. It's an extremely talented group, and my job is to provide some stability, communication, get the information they need as well. So
You're getting it. Thank you.
Okay. With that. that concludes the presentation.
So would I suggest, because I know we had someone in the audience that wanted to make a public comment, so I think maybe what we'll do first is open up for public comment. If your question is easy to answer, I think it's fine for Corbett to answer if it's a quick answer. Otherwise, the superintendent will follow up with you after the meeting, and then we'll open it up to the board discussion if we have any further comments. So I'll open up now for public comment or question. Did you want to come forward? Yeah. And if you could please identify yourself. Thank you.
Cynthia Ronish, community member, also running in the trustee election. And so I just had a question on one of the slides you had said, or there were two slides. So one slide said you asked for $3 million in cuts and people came back with $1.8 million for this past year. Yeah. And then you had some projected ideas for cuts for this year. What was the amount of those projections?
That's an easy enough, if you can give at least a preliminary answer, and then we can follow up later.
Sure.
So Robert, do you want to go back to the slide?
Back up. So to answer the first question, in the spring of 2018, the district convened a fiscal advisory and LCAP combined group, and they were charged with trying to identify $3 million of cost reductions for this current school year. That group, given their processes that I wasn't part of, were able to identify $1.8 million. The staff, the district staff, were the ones that formally brought that recommendation forward for consideration. And then to answer your second question, there's a stated goal of identifying additional $3 million of savings this year, knowing very well that we've already launched a school year. There's been commitments to be made, people who've been hired, but these are examples of savings that we've decided on from in July and August, and we'll continue to look at ongoing opportunities.
But do those equal $3 million? I guess
No, it does not.
Okay, so there was no projection of
Correct. So those 4 bullet points underneath are hopefully they do not add up to 3. Yeah.
Thank you, Corbett. So I think I'll open it up for the trustees. I do want to mention, Corbett, that oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Tim. And okay.
Tim Mullery, California School Employees Association President. I just wanted to point out to everybody here that the recommendation from the committee last year was for $2.8 million, and there was unforeseen circumstances of how that money turned out that made it 1.8. But we actually agreed to $2.8 million when we made the recommendation.
Thank you. As I open it up to the board members, I just want to say this because it reminded me of the process that in January we had our board workshop, and shortly after we actually did pass a resolution, and we were directing the superintendent to work with the committee with a target, and we were very careful with the word. We used the word target, $3 million. But we were steadfast that they were to come back if they weren't able to meet that target, if it was just plain impossible at that point. But then we've continued since that time to say to keep looking. So I just wanted to clarify that as well. And I thought of something, and now it escaped me, so I'll open it up to, oh, I just remembered. So this slide here does not include the savings for the fact that we're not backfilling Dr. Topier's position as well then.
Correct.
Okay, so that's another sizable amount of funding that'll go towards. Okay, thank you.
In addition to that, whatever savings from anything that will be additional decisions that are made to have further savings, all these will come up and be shown for the first time formally in December at our first report.
Very good. Thank you for that clarification. Any other board members have a question or comment?
I'm wondering, it just occurred to me, another savings with our new superintendent is that we did not have to hire a search firm at the cost of $50,000 to $60,000, and I'm not sure if that was budgeted. I can't remember in the 18-19 budget, but we will not be expending that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's in the budget.
Yeah, I don't recall if we put that in there either. I don't recall.
Valerie Pitts has found the direction for all departments to identify 10% cost savings. We went through her and your board's budget thoroughly, so I did not see that contract in there. It wasn't budgeted for.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Any other comments before we move on?
I just wanted, I'm on the fiscal advisory group as an observer along with Michael. And last night we met, as Lars mentioned. It was a great meeting, really good energy in the room, and I think there's wonderful representation from across the community and from within our district, from parents, community members, and staff members. So it was great to be in that room. And one thing I wanted to share with the board is that this year, as you know, we're splitting the group. So we have a separate fiscal advisory and a separate LCAP group. But they will be talking to each other. We have several people who are sitting on both of those groups. And at the end of each meeting, we develop a shared message that we want the other group to hear. So like I'm on the fiscal advisory group, we'll come up with a shared message that will be shared with the LCAP group. And so there's going to be clear communication between the two groups. The LCAP group will be talking about what the district's goals are and what we value and what we need to have, and share that with the fiscal advisory group, who will be charged with making sure we honor all of those values and goals and try to come up with these savings with that in mind. So I think that's important, given that we have a different process this year. We don't have everyone in the same room. We have two different groups, but they are going to be talking and be on the same page, is how it was presented last night.
Very good. Any other comments or questions?
So I just had one more comment about last night, which I thought was a good meeting. Tara led the meeting and did well, and Tara made it very clear that the fiscal advisory group is intended to make recommendations to the superintendent for areas of budget cuts, and will be, pursuing two different scenarios, one with the additional parcel tax fund and one without. But that it would be the superintendent who is going to be making the decisions. So, and I thought Tara was very clear about that in terms of setting sort of expectations, and that was sort of helpful from the get-go. Mm-hmm. And I think, frankly, part of that is we've learned from last year. We didn't convene the fiscal advisory, the joint group, until pretty late in the year, mm-hmm. And the fact that we're doing it now so early, and we didn't have a chief budget officer last year. Now we have, right? So we are just the sort of the whole structure of the process, I think, is quite strong, and I know that I think that the decisions are going to be difficult. We ought not to be Pollyannish about that. They're going to be difficult, but the process is, I'm pretty confident in the way the process is moving.
Question?
I just wanted to clarify, just a quick clarification on something that Michael just said. It's ultimately going to be the board deciding but the recommendations from these groups will go to the superintendent, and then she will present her recommendation to us, which might not be the same as what lands in her lap.
Barbara?
Is there any value in knowing who the participants are on these committees? I don't want them to be objects of anybody's wrath, certainly.
Yeah,
but
superintendent.
Yeah, it's up to the superintendent.
So they are not secret committees, and so the members' names will be shared. Mm-hmm. Contact information will not be shared.
Of course not.
But member names will be shared, and affiliation, meaning and the affiliation is I'm a
right.
district employee, TFT representative, Drake parent, that kind of thing.
Will that information be appropriate on the website, do you think?
That's something we'll have to talk about. You know, it's a fine line between being transparent with who these people are and creating a lobbying situation where it's not hard to find people. You know, we do want people to have the space to participate, you know, in an open manner without being lobbied. And that's something we talked to the group about last night. So it's going to be an ongoing conversation with the committees themselves.
I think sometimes as a community member, you want to know the affiliation. You want to know how many parents versus how many merchants, whatever it is. So whatever you decide, if we need something on the website, maybe that's one way to look at it as well.
Thank you.
So are we ready to move on to the next item? Okay. Now we are recessing for the public hearing, Tamalpais Union High School District Sunshine Articles for TFT negotiations, the district's initial proposal for 2018-19 negotiations with the Certified Employees Association. The TAM Federation of Teachers is presented for public comment and board adoption. Do we have any public comment for this hearing item? I have a question for the superintendent, excuse me. I just noticed it said adoption.
Yeah, it's not for adoption.
Okay, that's what threw me. I said adoption. I thought, geez. Okay, so that was an error. That's not there any longer. So seeing no public comment, we will recess back, or we'll stop the recess and return to the regular meeting.
Here we are.
I didn't say that right, did I? It's not a recess back. Okay, so now I think that's why you were possibly standing there. Are you doing item F, the first reading?
No, I just want to know if you had any questions with regard to the sunshine items.
No, I believe we talked about this previously. It was my understanding that unless the board has any questions. Okay, thank you. Okay, so Dr. Topier, first reading of Board Policy 5. Actually, you're not Dr. Topier.
We'll be doing this.
Mr. Wes Cedros. I have a 2 for 2 here. 5131.2 bowling, approximately 7:45. We're ahead of schedule.
And I hope to keep us that way.
Okay.
So I am here to talk about the first reading of 5131.2, board policy on bullying. The last time this policy was updated was in 2012. In looking at our policies and trying in my office and trying to kind of prioritize those most important for student safety, bullying is one of the primary concerns, all forms of bullying. And it is mentioned tangentially referred to in the next policy, the second policy, the immigration policy, in AB 699. So I thought this was a good time to bring an updated bullying policy before the board. Our previous bullying policy from 2012 is actually pretty comprehensive. It was a pretty good policy, but times have changed. Increase in use of social media and cyberbullying in particular necessitated some changes. The changes, the updates come directly from the CSBA model policy, so this is nothing that we've gone out on our own to create, but it encompasses 4 main areas for change, and you've seen both the new policy and then the red line version, and those 4 areas are that the new policy now encourages and increases the call for collaboration with community stakeholders and our law enforcement partners in combating, preventing, and addressing bullying concerns in the schools. It also highlights the need for education for both students and staff on the definitions of bullying, the causes of bullying, and how to address or report bullying in an effective manner. The new policy also places an emphasis on the importance of mental health staff in dealing with the effects of bullying, so both in the prevention and intervention as well as when we're talking about the consequences or the discipline aspect in referring both the victims of bullying and the perpetrators to our mental health staff. So with specific emphasis on our counselors, our school psychologists, school social workers, and our campus security staff. Like I alluded to in my opening, it further defines and kind of narrows down, or actually further defines and expands what we know about cyberbullying and how to address that. And also it outlines consequences, for lack of a better word, for staff and students who do not report bullying or who perpetrate acts of bullying. So there's no cost associated with this board policy update. We will continue to educate staff as well as our students in the classes that we already have. And so those are I think I said 4. Those are the 5 main areas where it's updated.
I'll just open it up for questions or comments.
Wes, I have a question. On under discipline, which is the last
right there at the end
paragraph on, I think it's on page 4. The pages aren't numbered, but I think it's page 4.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting issue. There's it's actually the first sentence there, which talks about discipline for bullying that may occur off campus.
Yeah.
And I guess I just went, I guess I just sort of wonder, I mean, I read this, but I wonder at what point really does it become, at what point does behavior that is off campus become an issue for which a school or a district ought to be taking disciplinary action, which obviously relates to that student's attendance and relationship with the school?
I think you nailed it in the closing part of your question. This is often difficult to explain to parents and the students themselves, but what the law compels us to do is determine if there's a nexus between the behavior, whether it was off campus, using a device that is not a school device, et cetera, and the effect of the bullying at school. So to use an example, it's a weekend, a student uses his own phone or his own computer to engage in cyberbullying on a student, against another student. As a consequence, that student is afraid to come to school on the following Monday, or sees, because of sustained bullying, sees a gradual decline in their ability to function at school or maintain relationships at school. We would consider that a nexus with, a nexus has been drawn to between the activity and school for the victim. It's often a decision that we have to make in conjunction with the victim. I have had several students who are like, yeah, it was mean and it is considered bullying, but it doesn't affect me. I don't care. Like it's not creating any sort of disturbance for me. In which case we take kind of a different route. And another student who may receive the same messages is significantly affected, and we do pursue more discipline. The other thing I'd add is that oftentimes we work in conjunction with law enforcement. So if something significant happens, whether there's a bullying, a physical incident, or even bullying, including sexting or shaming with pictures, over electronic devices, we do involve law enforcement, and we pursue a parallel track. We let them do their job and aid in their investigation while also looking at consequences for the school. So the key is really to find that nexus between the behavior outside of school and the effects at school for the victim.
Thanks.
Any other question or comment? We're not taking action on this item. It's your first reading. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
I think Laura?
No, I think it's Barbara's turn because I jumped ahead of her earlier in the meeting. And these little things matter, so you go first.
The word, the definition of bullying probably needs to be considered, especially since there are some staff who have experiences among themselves that they claim are bullying situations. So do these protocols, does this policy cover staff to staff?
No, this is in the 5,000, so this is a student-centered policy. The only mention of staff and any sort of discipline is at the end. I think it's the last sentence, which is mandating staff to report instances of bullying, but it doesn't deal with staff to or adult behavior.
Where would that be?
You have to help me on the number.
We actually,
Is it
so,
in them?
yeah, those
Yeah,
are
I forwarded that
4,000.
question to them
4,000.
so that they
yeah.
could bring it back.
Okay.
And, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so we have board policy in the 4,000s personnel, including non-discrimination, which is 4030. We have AR 4031, which is about how to file complaints. We have our sexual harassment policy as it relates to adults. And we also have 4119.21, which is professional standards and conduct. And that is where, mistreatment of staff to each other would be covered, because those are personnel policies.
And in that, there's direction to staff as to what to do.
Yeah, there's a complaint policy in the
Complaint
uniform
policy.
complaint policy.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple comments and a couple questions. First of all, thank you for sifting through our policies and identifying this as one that needs to be revised. There are lots of red lines up there, and I appreciate that. I'm wondering how many incidents, why this bubbled up as an important policy to update. I didn't ask this question in advance, and I'm sorry I didn't, but I'm wondering how many bullying incidents are reported in the TAM district, and if you have a guess as to how many are not reported. How many of our students do you think are suffering from bullying and do not feel comfortable reporting, or a teacher or a friend doesn't report it for them? I'm wondering how big this problem is.
It's prevalent. I can get the numbers for you on the incidents that we took action on, like in the last year. I don't have that information in front of me, but that's pretty easily accessible, and I can get that. It'd be conjecture to try to say, like what percent are not reported. I think I would guess a pretty high percentage, and I might be surprised if we could ever get that information that it was even higher. I think there's a lot of shame around reporting bullying. There's also fear that comes with making an accusation like that and the possible consequences. Even students that do report, are brave enough to report bullying, or parents who come forward will often say that my student has been bullied, but I don't want anything done about it. And that puts us in quite a bind as teachers, as counselors, as administrators, to try to figure out what to do with that. But they do so, they keep that quiet because they're afraid of negative consequences afterwards. And what was your other question?
I was just asking if you had an idea of how big a problem it is, and you're answering.
The other thing I'd say is I hear from, and this is all word of mouth. There's nothing scientific or anecdotal, but I hear from my middle school counterparts that there seems to be a lot more bullying and cyberbullying behavior in the middle school grades. That the kids tend to grow out of some of that behavior by the time they hit middle school, and we do see it. We do see it more in our 9th and 10th graders than we do in juniors and seniors. They tend to mature out of some of that behavior. Doesn't mean that some of the behavior that is exhibited in the older students isn't pretty severe when it happens, but it seems to happen at a higher frequency in that 6, 7, 8, and 9, 10.
This leads me to a follow-up question then. One of the difficult parts about being a high school district is aligning with all of our feeders and really understanding what's happening in those districts. And I'm wondering if you and your counterparts in our feeder districts have conversations about things like this, bullying policies, if they are setting their students up and their parents up well so that when they come to TAM district, they're not surprised by our policy.
I know they're working hard at it. Each of the middle schools that feed in have some sort of character ed program going on at their schools, but I don't have an opportunity to meet very frequently or formally at all with the feeder districts.
I mean, part of it's
people.
covered in Ed Code. I
Sure.
see a trustee back there from one of our feeders.
We have the same policy.
Yeah.
It's a CSBA policy.
So I think that's part of how much of this policy can we tweak to be specific to our district, and how much of it is prescribed by CSBA and Ed Code?
All of it is prescribed by Ed Code, and it comes directly from the CSBA updates. And I think there is some value in leaving it more broad than narrowly focusing on our district. And I don't, with this policy in particular, I think there's a reason to do that with some policies. I think with this policy in particular, I don't know where I'd narrow it to fit our specific context, because we do have 5 campuses, and as you said, we feed from 11 different districts. I think it's good to keep it a little more broad.
So are you saying that our feeder districts all have the identical
More
policy?
likely than not, they do.
Okay, well, that's good. Be consistent. And then the last question I had is, do we have an AR on this policy, an administrative regulation on this, or just a BP?
Oh, that is such a good question. I will have to look, but I think it's just the BP.
Often if we make a change to one, we make a change to the other, but sometimes we don't have a corresponding AR to a BP.
We do, at the risk of being wrong up here, I would say that I believe that there is not an AR associated with this, because the consequences for this are covered in our AR 5144, which is our discipline policy.
Okay.
You want me to go
which has been updated. Yeah, go ahead. Which has been updated in the last, I think, 18 months or so.
4,000?
No, 5.
Sorry. 5,000.
131.2.
31.
Stop. You went back.
Right there?
No,
No,
131.
little 31.
Go up a little bit more.
131.2. It's a little bit higher.
Just a BP?
Yeah, just the BP.
Yeah, just BP.
Thank
Any
you.
Any other questions, comments, Chuck?
Yeah, comments. Yeah, I think you're right, absolutely right, that it's underreported. There's, a code of silence around bullying. I think that this policy is a tremendous improvement over what we've had. The nature changes. When I was in school, it was really physical, fights every day, multiple fights every day. Now it's less physical, but it's probably more prevalent. Rather than just passing a note to one person in class, you pass a note to, all 800 or 2,000 of your Facebook friends. And it's brutal in that respect. So, thank you
Sure.
for this.
Thank you. So with that, I think we'll move on to the second reading of the new BPAR 5145.13, immigration enforcement.
Yeah, this was Valerie, so
Okay.
I can do it. So this is the second read on the policy that was brought 2 weeks ago. And I know there was some questions around certain language, which we did check and is compliant with Ed Code.
Okay. And we're not taking action on this, so we'll end up on the consent calendar next time if we don't have any further revisions. Is that
Yes.
correct?
There's a typo in it where it has natural origin instead of national origin.
Are you sure it's a typo? No.
On the red line.
On the red line?
Yeah, on the board policy. If you go down on the first page, the superintendent designee shall, and then it has natural origin.
Okay.
There it is.
Any other comments?
That's all right. You don't have to bring it up, Mary. We can.
Yeah, I was the one who raised this, and I see that the red line does address the issue that I raised, which is we do collect this information, but the government code refers to not collecting it for law enforcement or immigration purposes. That's the exact language that's used in the section. I guess what I just don't understand is why don't we use the language that's in the statute, right? Instead of saying for use by law enforcement, for law enforcement / immigration officials, the statute says for law enforcement or immigration purposes. So, I mean, I would just take it right out of the statute, since that's why we're doing it.
Okay. I didn't actually, sorry, I didn't work on this policy.
I know.
Valerie did, so
I know.
I can
And I
make
assume that
those
she got that
changes.
from a lawyer or CSBA. I mean, it was omitted.
CSBA.
Yeah, it was omitted before, which I think was a mistake. And I think this is better, but I just don't understand why we just don't use the, I mean, this happens every once in a while. I mean, for the, you know.
I think, see if I can get clarity on why CSBA changed it, which might be
My
helpful.
suggestion would be just to use the statutory language right in the section that it's cited, which is, whatever it is, 8310.3B. And thank you for making this in red line so we could easily see the changes.
Laura, you also had a comment at the last meeting on this policy. Has it been addressed?
Yes, I had a question about including religion in the string of characteristics, but that is, as I understand it, it's in there because we need to be compliant with the language of Ed Code. So,
Okay.
yes, thank you for addressing that.
So the follow-up action item is you're going to check with CSBA and just understand why it's written, with the intent of writing it different to begin with, and bring it back to the board at the next meeting for further. Okay. Any other questions, comments before I move on? Okay, so I think we're going on to the next agenda item unless there's public comment on this reading. Okay. Let's move on to item H, and I believe this is you again, sexual harassment, gender discrimination prevention update.
So, good evening, everybody. So Wes is going to join me for this. As most people know, but we will reiterate that Wes and I both serve as Title IX coordinators for the district. So this falls under our jurisdiction as far as making sure that we are compliant with Title IX and also with the laws of educating all of our employees. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of, sort of why we're presenting to you tonight. As we know, state law requires that we provide sexual harassment, discrimination, prevention training each year for employees, but we also now have a law that requires that we provide this information to students. So any school that has students between 7th and 12th graders has to now include sexual harassment prevention, affirmative consent, as you can see, adolescent relationship, intimate partner violence, and human trafficking. So those are all things that we are building into our curriculum, but most specifically this past year, we added sexual harassment specific training. We had about 90% of our students go through about a 90-minute workshop that was developed in collaboration with the Social Studies Department, district office staff, and wellness and counseling. And that was implemented between April and June with all of our social studies teachers, to whom we are eternally grateful for that. And we also had all 12th graders participate in affirmative consent workshops. And we also administered a Title IX survey to all staff in the spring, and we had about approximately 200 staff members respond to that. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So first, the student workshop. We had a lot of, we have state law, but we've also had a lot of feedback from community and staff that they really think students were in need of education. Some basics of what is sexual harassment, what constitutes sexual harassment. You hear kids throw around language sometimes, and you wonder if they really know what they're saying. So this is just an overview of the workshop. We tried to make it as interactive as possible. We also got a lot of feedback from the staff who did it, as well as some students, to try to make it as relevant for them as possible, to use scenarios that they could relate to. And this was a sample slide from the workshop that many of the students we talked to said that was the most informative thing for them in the workshop, that, that sexual harassment happens in all directions. And that anyone can be a harasser and anyone can be a victim, that it's not gender specific. We also use the Keenan modules for all of our staff, and that is run through Lars's office. And we're happy to report that this year the Keenan modules they've been completely revamped. And they include information on student to teacher harassment. It includes information on recognizing sexual abuse of a student, recognizing grooming when an adult is grooming and recognizing the signs of that. A lot of really useful information that sort of grew out of just the sexual harassment piece. I think the other important piece that we've talked about with the students, and it was also in the Keenan modules, is that the language or actions don't actually have to be directed at a person for that person to feel harassed. And that's a really important piece for them to understand. So if I'm sitting in class and two people behind me are having a conversation that's making me uncomfortable, even though it's not directed at me, I am being harassed. And I'm in a class, I'm in a captive place, I can't leave, and that is harassment. So it was really important for us to reiterate to students that you actually don't, freedom of speech is not absolute. You can't just say those things around people, that you actually have to be cognizant of your conversations and your actions, pictures, whatever, those kinds of things are important to know. And I think that was another sort of really eye-opening thing for a lot of students to hear. And then also covers all sorts of forms of harassment. As Wes said with the bullying thing, there is, interesting connection with the with social media now, and the internet, and that kind of level of sharing ability, if you will.
Right.
I think we should jump.
Yeah.
Given that, we had reports last year from teachers, being harassed by students, beyond the Keenan modules, particularly with our first year teachers, is sexual harassment by students part of the orientation that you do? Is there any reinforcement of this for our, younger teachers?
We do, they do discuss it with the mentors in sort of a smaller, we don't do it in the big orientation day, but they do the mentors really go over aspects of how to respond to different scenarios. And that is one of the scenarios, because unfortunately we've had some younger teachers who have been harassed in the classroom, and we've sort of learned from that experience. And so our mentors meet once a month with our new teachers, and so each month there's various topics, and I know like August, September is really about classroom management and how to manage kids and how to respond and, you know, what to report and to whom.
No, I was just going to jump in. I think we used a bit of jargon earlier when we said.
I'm having trouble hearing you, Wes.
Sorry, Chuck. We used a bit of jargon earlier, grooming, and I saw a couple of people like, you know, what is that? That's when an adult intentionally pursues and sort of prepares or grooms, if you will, a student or a young person with the intent of having some sort of inappropriate relationship. So oftentimes this will take place over weeks or months in various forms, you know, flattery and gifts and getting their target increasingly comfortable with their presence. And so that's, I know I'm not giving you a
and they groom the
definition,
parents
but I think
too,
you get
and they groom parents
and groom
too.
parents,
Yeah, you know,
to ingratiate themselves and,
right.
and with an end in mind. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that. Michael asked me, and I was just envisioning people combing their hair. I didn't know what the.
Sorry.
What,
yeah.
Thank you.
No, but it is, I mean, I thought it was a really valuable addition to the Keenan modules this year, you know, to have an eye out for that.
Yeah, it's really good. I'm glad you did that.
So we also did some additional training for the administration team, and I'd like to thank TFT Vice President Ann Jaime for joining us for that day. It was really a valuable day. It was led by Peter Rittling. He's an attorney with Dennis Walliver Kelly Law Firm. And what we did was we provided him the results of our survey, our Title IX survey, and talked to him about certain circumstances so that he could really be specific with the training. It covered not just sexual harassment, it covered a wide basis of discrimination, gender discrimination, and a lot of really valuable information. And the morning was more sort of the nuts and bolts, like, you know, here's the feedback, yeah, here's the information. Then the afternoon, we had the opportunity to break into small groups and do role plays of actual case studies that had happened in various districts that really gave us an opportunity to kind of work through things, to get feedback, and have Peter there to give us information around, well, actually, you know, this is some things that you should say or can't say, or, you know. So it was a really valuable day. Our entire administrative team went through that training on August 10th. Anything?
No.
So we had some key takeaways from the Title IX survey that Wes and I will be working on to implement early in this fall. They would, you know, I think the clear information can be about how I file a complaint and to whom. There was feedback that now that it's on the website and that they can do it directly on the website, it's a lot easier than it has been. But that is something that we will continue to communicate out to staff and students and parents so that it's a very clear process for them. Some good news that 95% of the staff who responded are aware of our sexual harassment policies. Most of them felt that there was a strong need for sexual harassment training for students on a regular basis. I think what's interesting that came up is the law says once in their, 4 years, but we know that, developmentally a 9th grader and a 12th grader are very different, and so they're going to hear the same information differently. So we're still working out how we're going to implement it and how we're going to chunk it out, but it will be something that will be revisited every year with our students. Working on response time. You know, as we said, about half of the staff members who stated that they had filed a complaint felt that the district was too slow to take action. So that's something that we feel we can act on quickly. And you know, again, majority of staff felt that students were not as aware of sexual harassment policies as they could be. And we did get positive feedback on the module on the survey. A lot of people said, thank you for doing that, please keep doing it. So we just wanted to give you some quick snapshots of some of the questions. So as we see here, you know, most of them said they do know about the policies. Many of them, a majority, said they know where and how to file a complaint. But obviously we want everyone to know where and how to file a complaint. You know, again, we would like this, you know, this to be 100%. So continued education, so that that number will, so that the no's will increase and the yeses will decrease.
Excuse me, what's the implication of decline to state? That I find that troublesome.
One thing about feedback we've gotten in previous surveys is people have asked us to have a neutral option.
I'm still not understanding.
Makes sense.
Can somebody?
I think not a lot. I think some people are wary about responding online, and don't trust the anonymity.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Thank you. And I should say this was an anonymous survey.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was no.
Okay.
And I think, you know, there may be a question, you know, was I or wasn't I, you know, in this sort of edgy incident, you know?
And I think it's fair to say that, I've had one-on-one conversations with a few people who said, after going through the training with the student module and hearing some more information, they're reflecting and saying, you know, there were things said to me that were inappropriate. I never said anything, and they were feeling like they're starting to feel the culture shift, and they're starting to recognize it, and they're like, wow, you know, I didn't say anything because that was just how it was, you know, and now they're starting to see. So I do think the decline to state might be what Chuck was saying, like, at the time I didn't think it was sexual harassment, but in reflection now, I think it probably was.
Excuse me, is there a question that says, how many times?
We did not ask how many times. We were, you know, we did ask who, and, you know, and so we got some more clarity.
Because
on
I
that.
don't think these are singular situations for people.
Oftentimes not. So some of our next steps that we'll be working on is to draft a communication that will go out to all of, you know, the entire community, students, staff, parents, that has some clear information on what our policies are, and also what the complaint procedures and how to get assistance, so that everybody has that clearly. That'll be something that we will send out regularly. I don't think you can over-communicate that information. Same thing with staff, make sure that it's also prominently placed, you know, both in writing on staff walls, but also on the district website prominently. We're working with principals to identify ways of getting all the 9th graders through the sexual harassment prevention workshop this fall, as well as the continue to do the affirmative consent workshops with 12th graders. And I think one thing that we didn't have a chance to do thoroughly, we did it a little bit last year, was to really look at our protocols and processes for response.
Question? No. Regarding what you were just talking about, Chuck, are there statutes of limitations for employees to file a complaint?
I might lean on Lars, but there's not a statute of limitations for reporting it in the employment setting to HR. I believe there are, depending on depending on the type of harassment, there are legal statutes for reporting to law enforcement.
Okay, because as we talk about this more and more, there may be potential folks who need to want to come forward and make these complaints as we are becoming more public about the protocols.
Yes, that's very possible.
And it started to happen.
In one of the first slides, you had all 12th grade students participating in affirmative consent workshops, which I think is really important and crucial for kids going off to college. But I would strongly suggest it is also important for incoming 9th grade girls. And
boys.
While I suspect that it's covered to some degree in social issues, if you've got a student taking world cultures in the fall semester, I think waiting till the spring is too late. In any senior class of, several hundred boys, there are going to be a handful who feel entitled and are predatory. And that's based on knowledge and experience in this district.
We do, in the sexual harassment workshop, and it's not the same as affirmative consent, but that's a point well taken, Chuck. In the sexual harassment workshop, we do address pressure, pressuring as a form of sexual harassment, which comes into there are supplemental materials for teachers around affirmative consent in that particular portion of the workshop.
Yeah, I think we just have a very vulnerable set of students at that particular time, in that particular age, in that particular setting.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up, Chuck. I think that we need to be gender neutral on this issue and recognize that all people need to be well informed and understand, regardless of how they identify themselves, on what is consensual and not, and what's appropriate and not. So when you said girls, I thought boys, everybody needs to know what the rules are. And then I'm wondering on these next steps if we have any dates or anything. There are a couple in here, like this semester, and I'm wondering if we can add any more teeth to the next steps.
So the draft communication, our target is to get that out by the middle of September.
Okay.
Both of these. This is the fall. The affirmative consent workshops happen, they schedule them sort of throughout the year. Wellness does them. So they do them in 12th grade, but I know that they also do like carnivals at, at lunchtime and do during tutorials. So those sort of activities,
It's kind of rolling.
Yeah, kind of goes on all year at the sites.
And the second bullet point, communicating with all staff members.
Same thing, by the middle of September.
Okay. I did have a question. I forgot to mention it with the bullying, and it applies to this too. The California Healthy Kids Survey results, I think I read that they're in, and I'm wondering if if bullying and sexual harassment from a student's perspective I can't remember if there are questions in there about those two issues.
Yes, there are, and I just received those last week. They're open on my computer right now, but I haven't had a chance to compare them to any previous year's surveys. I think West Ed has them under embargo for public release until November or December. That doesn't mean they won't be available to you before that. But yeah, I was just sent the files last Thursday or Friday.
And that's another data point for us, though.
Absolutely.
And then finally, the last question is about the survey. This was the first year that we surveyed the Title IX survey of our staff, and great response, like 40%, 198. Are we planning, is that another next step? Are we planning on doing that annually?
Yeah. Yes. You know, I think, and we worked with an attorney to develop the survey. So obviously there's certain data we want to keep, and then there's some questions, I think, given some feedback, we want to adjust to make sure we're capturing, you know, useful data.
Yeah, I was happy that we had such a great response rate, but it'd be nice to have 100%. It's always nice.
I have a follow-up question. It was between 13 and 14% that felt they'd been harassed. And it sounds like there might have been a follow-up question when somebody hit yes, and that's how you got the feedback about the response time being too slow. Based on that percentage, are there additional follow-up questions that you think would be helpful in terms of understanding the nature of the problem so you can mitigate it, or is this part of the process? Is this going to be iterative?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it. You know, this was our first run.
Right.
And I think what this helped us know is like, oh, you know what else we need to know?
Yeah, that's why
Yes.
it was, okay. Any other questions before I open up to public comment? Are there any do you have a public comment? Want to come forward? Thanks.
Cynthia Ronish again. 2 questions. Does the board do the Keenan modules training that the staff does? Because it sounds like it might be useful for the Title IX, the sexual harassment, because that was an issue in the spring. And then the second question is, Title IX is a big deal, and sexual harassment allegations are a big deal. And I know that the district appointed another Title IX officer last year or in the spring to address this issue. I would suggest or ask whether you have plans to spell out a time period that you will respond, right? So whether it's within 48 hours or 72 hours, to have a term that is vague, like we will respond more quickly because people felt it was slow, is not enough. So
Thank you. Yeah, no, those are good comments. And any other public comment on this item? Okay, thank you. I think we'll go on to the next item, which is provisional internship permit.
As the board is aware, we've hired approximately 30 teachers new to the district over the course of the past few months in preparation for the school year. We had an inordinate number of science teacher needs, specifically 2 reasons. One, we had a number of science teachers step away, and secondly, with a new course in place, Physics of the Universe, there were new requirements credential requirements for teachers to hold in order to teach that class. We were very successful in our search, but we were 1 person short. We did identify a young man we think is going to do a fabulous job. His name is Matt Samet. Yes, he is Todd Samet's son. He has a college degree in physical sciences, geosciences, but we needed to secure a provisional internship for him, permit for him, in order for him to be legal in the classroom. We have filed all the PIP paperwork. He holds a temporary certificate of clearance right now, which allows him to be in the classroom. But this is all part of the PIP requirement that the board actually, in trustee consideration format, approved this internship permit. And you see that there are some requirements that we have to prove that we've done in order to secure this permit. We've exhausted all conventional avenues of recruitment and so forth. And I wrote letters to the state explaining what we do and how we look for teachers and all the rest. So, and Mr. Samet will be enrolling in a credential program, though there's no requirement to do so, quite frankly, for the PIP, but he wants to be a teacher, and so that's all part of it. So we ask that you approve the provisional internship permit for Mr. Matt Samet.
Any questions? Chuck?
No, I was going to make the motion.
Oh. Any other comments or questions from board members? Any public comment? Okay. Would anyone like to entertain a motion?
Okay, I move we approve the provisional internship permit for Matt Samet.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll pull the items, consider the items that were pulled off the consent agenda. Boy, this is too high now. So we have items 12C, F, and G. 12C was Laura, and it's the approve the purchase orders over $40,000.
Yeah, I pulled this not because of the content on the on this item, but it's a change in how we've done things.
Mm-hmm.
We used to have purchase orders over $7,500, and I know that Interim Superintendent Pitts indicated that we are evaluating this process, and I was just wondering if anyone from staff could give us any information on why our purchase order list looks different, why it's 40,000 and over versus 7,500.
Sure. In evaluating, as I alluded to earlier in the evening, business efficiencies and processes in place that when I'm into the business office, been able to evaluate the fresh eye, what are things that my staff spend a great deal of time on and related to the value of the work being done. One thing that Dr. Pitts pointed out pretty quickly that I noticed is the amount of time required to process paperwork and processes. Well, this is one area that Dr. Pitts pointed out, and we looked at the board policy of where this came from, and it's last updated in 1992. So when you think about inflation, 2.5% inflation annually over 25 odd years, and we looked at neighboring districts for their kind of threshold for comparables. It's way up in the $30,000 to $50,000 range. One of our neighbors to the south doesn't even have a threshold. So this is a practice we're looking at changing for business efficiency in terms of how do we operate their team most efficiently given the demands. With 1,200 more students, 1,200, that many more proportional more expenditures, paperwork that go through that office. So this is an area we're looking at discussing as a change of practice and potentially coming back to propose a potential new policy.
Okay, I just wanted us all to hear that, so thank you for clarifying. I'm fine with this item.
Would you like to make a motion to approve it?
Yeah, unless anybody else has anything to add. Then I make a motion to approve purchase orders over 40,000, list number 4.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, is this a roll call vote?
No.
No. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And now we move on to Michael Futterman, approve MOU with Dynamic Solutions for Youth. Did you already take care of it?
Yeah, so we have pulled that and we will bring it back for the September 11th board meeting.
Good, thank you.
Okay. So now we will go to item G, approve 2018-19 bell schedules, and this is Barbara.
My concern, as I looked at the bell schedules, is attendance. One of the bell schedules, I couldn't tell which school, I can't remember. The youngsters with that schedule get out at 12:15, and Mike, there may not be an answer to this really, because one could argue, you get out at 12:15, go, you know. On the other hand, there's that thought that, hey, why bother? So I would like to know what sites are doing. Once again, I'd like if possible at some point, an update on how are we addressing attendance issues relative to these schedules.
Do you want to come back with that information? How would you like to proceed, Dr. Topier?
I will come back with more information. What I can tell you is that we have staff running some analyses from attendance to look for specific patterns.
Excellent.
Okay. On days of the week or periods of the day. So she's working on that.
I also, when I look at this schedule, I'm reminded of the potential for schedule change should the Portantino Senate Bill, what is it, 328,
right.
pass. Consequentially for us, I think any school district for that matter, I think there are fiscal and community consequences of mandating that law and affecting these schedules. Having said that, however, Drake has launched, a pilot, and the folks that participated in that, I know they donated their time to come up with all of that. So we'll be looking, I think, at Drake's evaluation of that process, because I think it's important that we honor the local control. That's just my point of view on that. Thank you.
Barbara, are you suggesting that similar in the past we've passed resolutions on gun control and other items? Are you, I think I saw some communication. Is that what you would like to bring back to the board in support of CSBA
Yes,
in
if I
asking
could.
for local control?
Yes, if I could, I would.
Okay.
I had a question on this item too. And that is about surplus minutes. And I saw the surplus minutes for Drake and San Andreas, but I didn't see them. It may not, I don't know if they're there and I just didn't see it, but for Redwood, Tam, and Tamascal. And that would be good to have, to know if we do have surplus, and if so, how much.
Yeah, I can look that up. All of the sites have surplus. I actually think Redwood has the most surplus minutes of all of the sites.
And Drake has the least. They're close, 68.
Yes, they're the closest.
Right.
And then, yeah, so if that could come back, that might be an interesting discussion, like looking at the discrepancy between the surplus minutes. I'm interested in that.
Can I go ahead.
Yeah, a thought that's sort of peripheral to this. About 4.5 years ago, when my first year on the board, a student came to the board and spoke to us in items not on the agenda, and suggested, the student was an athlete, suggested that on minimum days for instructional improvement, that the schedule should be flipped, and that the teachers should come in the morning and the students come in the afternoon, because the students, who have after-school activities leave at noon, and then they had to come back at 3:30 or 4 o'clock, and it was extraordinarily disruptive. But the superintendent at the time and the board at the time, habitually just ignored everybody and everything that came before the board and that thing. But it made a lot of sense to me.
Were you on the board then? Just checking.
No. I don't know if there are reasons for not doing it, but it just made a whole lot of sense that on those minimum days for, instructional improvement, that the kids come in the afternoon and they get to stay and they don't have to go home and then come back.
That's an interesting point. Can I entertain a motion to approve the 2018-19 bell schedule?
I move we approve the 2018-19 bell schedule.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Did I do it wrong?
No, I think
Okay.
schedules, plural.
Oh, sorry. You're right. Okay, so now we have 2 more items. I don't think we have anything to report on board communications. I should double check. But we have the trustee reports. This is a time for the trustees to share any information with each other, since given the Brown Act, we do not share information collectively among the board members. Does anyone have anything you'd like to share that you think we need to know?
So last Thursday, I went on the first day hike with the team program on Mount Tamalpais. Things look great kids. Yesterday, I was at Redwood. I was in Tom Eller's engineering class. That was fabulous. Kids were totally engaged in the project they're working on, which was making a solar heat cooker out of cardboard and aluminum foil. Like the engineering class at Drake, there were 18 boys and 2 girls. Something needs to be done. Then I was in a second period Foundations of Algebra class with Ernesto Diaz. Maybe 40% of the class were English language learners. There was one student there who was all ninth graders except for one student who was a senior, refugee, hadn't been to school for 6 years. So, those are the kind of challenges we're dealing with. And I think a notable thing, which I mentioned to Dr. Topier the other day, whereas last year there were 2 sections of foundations for algebra, this year there are 6 at Redwood, which is disturbing to say the least. The kids were all over the board. Looking at some, could not multiply a 3-digit number by a 1-digit number. They were stuck on that. So it's a long way for those students to get to algebra. It's a long haul to get to Algebra 1, a very long haul. And then I was in Mike Hellman's AP US History class. Of course, I've never wanted to teach because you just have to go so darn fast. But those students, they had a lot of work to do over the summer, and they were on top of it. It was sort of the review part. That was impressive kids, and Mike's a great teacher. Great to be at Redwood. So that's my report.
Thank you, Chuck.
Okay. Opening of school on Wednesday, I was able to attend TAM, Redwood, and San Andreas, and noted the engagement of so many students. It was very quiet. Everybody was organized. Everybody was involved in activities that would help them collaborate with each other and support each other. The organization that I observed was really striking in that I'd not seen so many schools all on the same page in terms of embracing and inducting our ninth graders into the community. And to that point, I also want to add that between Monday and, well, I guess the past week or so, I had the opportunity to encounter a couple of youngsters whose behavior, comments elicited red flags for me. And within 45 minutes, when I brought those concerns to staff, in this case at Redwood, it was Ann Jackson, she brought that concern of that youngster to wellness. That was within an hour. And there are 2 cases where youngsters were immediately embraced, as it were, by counseling and help. And this was before the first day of school. So bravo, bravo. Everybody's on it. Everybody is so committed. I also want to add and inform you that CSBA's position on the Portantino bill is not against students starting later. That's not the issue. The issue is the mandate. And I think we all know that mandates eventually become costly and can become unwieldy. CSBA's position is to offer choice. Keep it local. So you may be seeing some campaigns for us as trustees and for our community as voters to submit their concerns and their voting preferences to our assemblymen and to the Senate to see if we can't come to a better agreement about how we handle the opening of school in our communities, that it's our decision rather than a blanket state mandate. Thanks.
You're going to go, but could we get a CSBA, is there something in writing that CSBA has?
Yeah, they emailed it.
I haven't opened it up. We'll forward it.
Just yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay. It should be. Everyone should have gotten one.
Okay, thank you.
Did you want to go?
Do you have anything to
sure.
share with the board?
I really enjoy listening to the 2 of you talk about visiting classrooms.
Yeah, I do too.
Teachers see things that we who are not teachers don't, and I really appreciate the insights that each of you bring. 2 things. Chuck and Laura and I were at the Marin County School Boards Association dinner at Rancho Nicasio, which was Monday?
It was the 23rd.
Last week. And that was it was very interesting. Actually, the keynote brief presentation was by Michael McDowell, who was formerly with this district, who's now the superintendent in the Ross School District, and he talked about teaching and learning, and specifically about learning and strategies for improving the learning side. It was very, very interesting. And then the other thing was that Laura and I were both at the LCAP Fiscal Advisory Committee meeting, and I thought staff did an exceptional job. Everybody who was there, and I appreciate the continued. You know, it's like the usual suspects, right? I show up here late at night, and you guys are still here. Corey's not paying attention now, but I mean, right? We had union leadership. I mean, it was, you know,
yeah, it's good.
People put in a lot of effort to make things go around here, and I just want to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you.
The only thing I wanted to add about the MCSBA dinner, that talk that Michael McDowell gave, focusing on learning, it was very inspiring to hear somebody that we know well talk with such passion about a growth mindset. And, you know, I just want us all to continually think about that, what we want for all of our students. And the only thing that none of you have mentioned, but we all did together, was attend the opening day on August 20th. And I was very, it's one of my favorite, the beginning and the ending of the year are two of my favorite times to be a board member, because we're with all of the people who make it all happen, the staff members, and at the beginning of the year, and then at the end, seeing all the graduates. So it was a moving day again to just be with all of our people who make this place tick. And I thought the energy was really good, and I know all of you did too, and I'm very sorry, Leslie, that I jinxed you. I'll just say that publicly. I told Leslie that she'd be just okay.
You don't have to tell him what happened. You can just stop.
I won't do it again. But I'm so glad you're okay.
It wasn't televised.
Yeah, well, now I am, so.
I'm done.
Okay, very good. Well, I don't have anything to add. I think you know what I've been busy with lately with certain lawyers and things, getting our new superintendent. So sorry I had to miss that dinner, but it was worth it for who we have sitting next to us. So now I think it's time for board communications. Mary, did we have any board communications? No, we did not. And now for the next item, it's the final item, public comment for items that are not on the agenda. And the board recognizes the value of public comment. And we would like to provide this time for members of the audience to address the board on any school-related matter not on this agenda. The board can take no action at this time. Each speaker is requested to identify themselves prior to addressing the board and will be heard up to 3 minutes. The presiding officer of the board shall determine, based on time constraints of the board, whether some time less than 3 minutes shall be allocated to individual speakers. Do we have any public comments for items not on the agenda? Yes, sir.
James Holmes, Larkspur, Redwoods class of 71, incidentally. Apparently, the press reports that the board majority will not seek re-election were not fake news. No doubt that decision was a very difficult and gut-wrenching one, because the outgoing majority is very conscientious, I know, and because people naturally want to be part of the process of renewal and rebuilding that we hope is beginning. However, in light of the circumstances and the press coverage we all know about, the majority's decision was very wise and very selfless. And if the proposed revenue measure passes, then at least some of the credit for its passage may well be due to that very wise and selfless decision. Thank you.
This meeting's adjourned. Thank you.